Hi there. I have to say, wow, Audrey Waters. That was fantastic. How could I possibly follow that? I mean, professionally speaking, I am quite used to actually following an apocalypse. But just listening to that, it just actually made me just actually want to go and hide in the pool room of the hotel and whimper. And I actually think that's what I'm going to do, so I'm really sorry. Oh man, I can't follow Audrey Waters. I can't. She's too good. She's too good. And there's Josh Siemens. He's too good as well. Oh, they're all too good. Oh no, I should Skype in. No. Hi. I'm David Kernohan. You caught me running out of delivering a keynote at Open Ed 13. It's difficult to argue against the ideals of open education, but unfortunately there are some spaces in which the doctrines of education reform have overtaken these initial ideas. To help tell this story, I want to look at the life of Sir Michael Barber.
This is what your university package looks like. What if you could have significantly more than this pre-built bundle? What if you had the option to be mentored by a seasoned professional in your field, helping you gain the correct skill set to merge seamlessly into your industry? What if big-name companies help design your courses so that you are fully prepared to enter their workforce? And better yet, what if you could pick up courses from anywhere around the world? An avalanche of change is coming. It's time to ask for more from your education.
That promotional video was absolute nonsense. It was embarrassing. But it was made by a distinguished former professor of education, who is regularly described as the foremost authority in delivering education reform. Something somewhere has clearly gone wrong with open education. To find out what and why, we need to return to the mid-90s and to the London Borough of Hackney. Michael Barber was a former borough councillor responsible for education and had previously been both a teacher and a policy advisor at the National Union of Teachers. Newly installed as a professor at the University of Kiel, in 1995 he was asked to be part of a small team of experts by the government of the day. Their task? To come to a conclusion about a once famous, now failing, school called Hackney Downs.
One of the team is Professor Michael Barber from Kiel University. He's one of the leading authorities on improving schools and says they have a tough job ahead of them.
The task of the Education Association will be to review the prospects for the school in the first half of the autumn term and decide whether the interests of the pupils are best served by closing the school and finding places for them in other successful Hackney schools, or whether they will be better served by redeveloping the school in some way.
It was replaced in 2004 by a new privately sponsored school on the same site, Mossbourne Academy, which makes great claims about the benefits of structure at school to the lives of students.
A lot of our youngsters come from fairly unstructured backgrounds, and what we try and do here is build more structure into their lives. So those rituals and routines of standing up when a teacher comes in, sir and miss, little mantra at the beginning of the lesson, ask them to reflect on their performance. All those things build structure.
As you get older and you realise that how important your GCSEs actually are, and getting into trouble is not really worth it. And
Michael Wilshaw became head of this school, eventually rising to become Chief Inspector of Schools in England in 2012. Much of the success of Mossbourne can be attributed to significant additional funding, 30% more than the average funding for similar schools in London. But both main political parties in the UK rushed to take the credit for successes at Osborne and the escape from the failure of Hackney Downs, as education increasingly became a key political issue.
Ask me my 3 main priorities for government, and I tell you, education, education, and education.
Right.
Tony Blair was supported in his focus on education by Michael Barber, who moved, during the first term of Parliament, from managing work on literacy in the Department of Education and Skills to a more central role in the Prime Minister's delivery unit. It was here that the word Delivererology was first coined to describe his focus on performance targets and metrics.
And the book is in 5 sections. You've probably seen it. There are 15 modules in those 5 sections. Module 1A is setting your aspiration, so deciding what you want to do. It then takes you through a set of organisational and process changes, and the final modules are to do with creating a permanent culture of delivery, so that you don't just deliver once, you can keep doing it into the future.
However, this target-driven approach was not without critics. Currently, the most visible of these is a British occupational psychologist called John Seddon.
What he has to say is that what management's about, if you want to make a change, is top management set targets for the people in the front line. In order to connect the top management to the people in the front line, you've got to worry about the delivery chain, all of the bits and pieces in between the top people and the front line. And all of these bits in the chain have to have their own actions, milestones and timetables in order that we deliver on the targets. Now, I can't be the only person in the room thinking, wow, is management that easy?
We're passionate about meeting these targets. Fiddling by the management. Altered their records.
But that's a bit odd. I mean, you're the consultant.
And started to amend some of the answers that the youngsters had given.
Trolley weights, none.
Targets.
3 levels of targets.
Clear targets. Those targets. Focus on those targets. Why they're targets.
The government tried to dismiss these reports as just a few bad examples. But report after report came out which revealed that this inventive gaming of the system was now endemic throughout the public services.
Now, Professor Timms, he argues that Barber's data don't support his conclusions, but today I've got bigger fish to fry. It's not that Delivererology didn't work. Delivererology, in my view, actually has made education worse. Now, I think the purpose of school is to help students learn how to learn. Schools, however, have become training institutions, training students how to pass tests.
The reference made to John Seddon to Professor Timms refers to an elegant piece of 2004 research in the British Educational Research Journal, where the statistical integrity of the claimed successes of Barber's literacy project was examined and found wanting. A criticism brushed off as the success stories of Delivererology are told around the world and extrapolated to other sectors.
But teaching to the test has become the norm because test results count for everything. Even the students ask now in the UK, "Sir, this stuff you're teaching today, is it in the exam?"
Delivery experts, like Barber, are often drawn into managing the delivery of education reform ideas developed by people with no expertise in education. It's impossible to avoid the daily barrage of multi-millionaire technology CEO rock stars telling us what's wrong with education, drawing on their own experiences of dropping out and starting a successful company. This, not educational fulfillment, is the dominant narrative in our culture. It's tempting to think that education is the last time many of these people heard the word no. Delivererology and related data-led approaches offer a tantalizing opportunity to bring the certainty and control of business process enhancement to the messy and real world of education.
A lot of the problems in education are technology around efficiently sharing things, and if someone could build a good application that got people engaged, then I think that there's a big opportunity there.
Well, 2 times ago when I was last in this hall, I was giving a speech and Mark Zuckerberg was in the audience. So I got him to drop out.
So after I decided that I kind of it was highly unlikely that I was going to go back, I remember this conversation. I was with my younger sister and my parents, and my mom was like, actually, I knew that you were going to drop out of college. I was like, thanks, Mom.
The truly impressive reforms share the same strategic core. They all include fair and reliable measures of teacher effectiveness that are tied to gains in student achievement.
When I was at school, I was developing a national magazine for young people, and the headmaster called me in one day and said, you can either run your magazine or you do your schoolwork. I said, thank you very much, but I'm going to leave the school and run my magazine. And I think that was a big mistake by the headmaster. And I think when Larry Page came up with the idea of Google, he left university early to do it. When Steve Jobs came up with the idea of Apple, he had to leave university to do it. But
truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation.
But how far can they be pushed? How far can we load our systems and our young people with testing and metrics? From their first experiences at school to learning as an adult on an ex-MOOC, the learner is measured, assessed, monitored and shaped by the need to provide data. Is it any wonder that the most interesting thinkers in education are on the edges of it? Open education was one of the very few spaces outside this ecosystem. Is it still? Are we the fire? Are we the structure? Are we the hammer or part of the wall? Michael Barber left Tony Blair's government to become a consultant, working firstly at McKinsey. He specialised in working with education systems around the world, introducing a range of measures and targets for public schools. For example, he was paid more than $4,000 a day to work with schools in Pakistan.
The Punjab Education Foundation, which is independent of government, gets government money and donor money, and is buying places in the low-cost private sector of schools, either directly or through a voucher scheme.
Measures of educational systems around the world were collated in his next job, at education publishers Pearson. Their Learning Curve report attempted to define a way to compare education systems around the world, with one of the key findings being that the quality of teachers was paramount.
The Learning Curve is an important step forward in understanding education systems around the world.
A key factor to the improvement in education is always the quality of the teachers.
However, the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund invested in chains of low-cost, for-profit schools in the world's most disadvantaged countries. These schools, charging around $1 a day, primarily used young high school graduates with the barest minimum of teacher training.
We have also developed a teacher training model that is simple. It's able to just take ordinary high school graduates, give them the skills that is needed to be effective in their classrooms. So you don't need any teaching experience. They are flexible, they are malleable, they are teachable, they are ready to teach.
Chains of schools with the power to hire teachers without professional training, always privately run and often for profit, became a feature of education reform across the world, as did a range of student monitoring and comparison regimes. One particularly powerful example was the rebuilding of the education system in New Orleans.
Not long after Hurricane Katrina flooded New Orleans, the Louisiana legislature cleared the way for the state to assume control of 107 out of 128 schools in the New Orleans district. Immediately, the state began converting many of its newly acquired schools to charter schools, publicly funded schools run by for-profit or nonprofit groups that operate by a charter or contract. One result is that the number of unionized teachers dropped from about 4,700 to 500.
We're going to try and turn as many schools as we can into charter schools, which are sort of analogous to free schools or academies. But in Louisiana, they are inarguably outperforming the state schools in terms of improvements, like in terms of rate of improvement.
Principal Sherilyn Branch turned down Vallis's offer of a charter for her school.
We have remained as we are. We think we're doing an incredible job with some of the most challenging children.
Benjamin Banneker Elementary was one of the most improved schools in the district last year. Its progress makes Branch skeptical of Vallis's grand plan.
I think there are good charters and bad charters.
Despite the inclusive language in the learning curve, it is the privately run school model that has gained most traction, and Michael Barber has been one of its most enthusiastic advocates. But the evidence behind the claims of success, the same supposed evidence that allows schools and systems to be compared against each other, has been questioned repeatedly by academics.
We wanted to look at the state of the world, and in particular the shift of power from the Atlantic to the Pacific, hence the emphasis on oceans. And the first third or so of the document is basically a history of the global economy in a few pages. You see a combination of innovation and economic growth providing global leadership, first of all for Atlantic countries, Britain and then Germany briefly and then the United States. And what we'll see in the next century is, given the rise of Pacific Asia, is much more influence in the Pacific Asian area.
The story of an economic leadership moving between countries throughout history is a compelling one, if ultimately meaningless if reasons for this are not identified. Education systems, it's argued, are the key to the next wave of economic leaderships, and Barber notes in passing how little each of the top systems have in common with each other, and how little correlation these have with economic power and entrepreneurship. This doesn't, of course, stop him making absurd generalizations. But the story left untold is that of intellectual property law. It's possible to tell a story. Indeed, academics like Nagesh Kumar in 2003 do tell the story that countries have fine-tuned their IPP regimes as per their developmental requirements. Typically, countries in Asia and in other regions have had softer IPP regimes in the early stages of their development, and these regimes have been strengthened as the countries developed and became significant producers of innovations and new technologies themselves.
Many aspects of Pacific Asian cultures have been very good for the last 50 years in terms of generating economic growth. There's a respect for the state, there's a belief that education is A, valuable, and B, not determined by birth.
What's the role of China when it comes to piracy?
Well, officially, China is actually a pretty good citizen. I mean, in terms of the letter of the Chinese law, it's now fairly well up with WTO guidelines. The problem comes at street level, if you like, with the enforcement and the daily practice of intellectual property transmission within the Chinese region, where that law is not terribly observed, shall we say.
When we copy, we justify it. When others copy, we vilify it. Most of us have no problem with copying, as long as we're the ones doing it. So with a blind eye toward our own mimicry and propelled by faith in markets and ownership, intellectual property swelled beyond its original scope, with broader interpretations of existing laws, new legislation, new realms of coverage, and alluring rewards.
You can draw a map similar to Barber's, showing intellectual property being born in Britain in the 1700s spreading to mainland Europe, and then across the Atlantic in the late 19th century and into Asia during the 20th century. Is it not at least worth considering that more and more restrictive laws around intellectual property are shaping and stifling innovation and growth? That Asia emerged as the leading global economy and then began to implement Western-style intellectual property laws? In 2010, Michael Barber contributed to the Brown Review of university funding in the UK. It should come as no surprise that the recommendations of the report centred on the need for private providers to enter the system and the systematic gathering of data to inform customer choice and policy decisions.
What we propose is a revolutionary new system which, for the first time, will put students in control of shaping their experience of higher education. Money will no longer go to institutions just for being there. Money will instead follow the student, meaning that student choice becomes the key principle in this system. That means providing students with the right kind of information, advice and guidance to make their choices count.
This is becoming a global phenomenon. Education reform used to be something that each country did separately, even until the 1990s, but now it's something that is debated globally and thought about globally. We know quite a lot now about how you improve education.
You could see this as the UK higher education iteration of a global vision, one that has been developed and refined over 18 years of education reform. A global, not a national vision, beginning with the idea of education as a global economic good.
Basically, to students and potential students, we're saying seize the moment, don't just think about a degree, think about becoming employable, think about how you can create jobs as well as just fit into a job, and think about learning throughout life. To universities, we're saying seize the moment, think about the global partnerships, think about technology, think about how you can transform teaching, think about how you can build partnerships right around the world. And then to governments, we're saying you've probably got a regulatory regime for your university sector designed in a national era, but now the university sector is global, so what are you going to do?
These excerpts refer primarily to Michael Barber's current work, promoting Avalanche is Coming and acting as a British education expert for hire at Pearson Education.
So globally benchmarked standards in math, science and the national language. We want data about how well people are doing. We want every child on the agenda.
As we have seen, data, and lots of it, is another key component, and the involvement of the innovative private sector.
And let me just pause on that public-private point. I know this from my 8 years working in the British government in a variety of positions, including in number 10 Downing Street. It's very hard to innovate radically in government. It's not that you don't want to, it's that the pressure of the media, it's that the risk of wasting public resources weigh heavily on you. But the private sector can innovate.
Barber also retains an involvement in low-cost-for-profit schools around the developing world and is a key figure in US education reform.
But what won't work is standing still. That's why we use the avalanche metaphor. But underneath the surface, lots is changing, and we think that avalanche is coming the way of a university near you. I think it's very early to have a clear view on the MOOCs, but one thing I'm pretty sure about is they're not going to go away. So there'll be some experiments that fail, there'll be some that succeed, but in the end, students, learners around the world are going to want to learn from the best person in the world on that subject.
I think MOOCs genuinely pose a challenge, because if institutions stay where they are, they do risk being overtaken by people who can get access to a fantastic material free. Online courses are great for giving you information. Difficult to turn that either into a revenue stream for an institution, but for the student, it's the mentoring, it's the wider aspects of the student experience, it's the employment advice, it's all the social life that students have.
But our first guest this morning, Sir Michael Barber, is one of the world's leading authorities on education systems and on educational reform. He's enjoyed a distinguished career in both the public and private sectors, and I'm really delighted, Michael, that you've agreed to speak to us this morning.
People see Avalanche as the MOOC report, but every aspiration that it has around MOOCs maps back to the educational obsessions that have characterized all of Barber's work. Globalization, global data, Economic good and private sector innovation, it's all in there. Education reform, modernising education, as a project is almost 20 years old. In common with other historical attempts, it focuses on standardisation, comparability and profit. And like other historical attempts, it is doomed at best to achieve nothing. Open education, in contrast, is a simple and revolutionary idea. The problems come when the preoccupations of the former are brought to bear on the latter. We hear a lot about open education as an economic good, a way of other educators accessing the best materials, as a way of disrupting education for private profit. But this is a 20-year-old story that the things we care about form only a very small part of. Michael Barber and others like him are scared of the impact that the genuinely world-changing power of open education can offer. We have a platform to do some genuine good, not least in campaigning for fair and rational intellectual property laws and in moving the educational experience of millions from beating an assessment to changing their lives and changing their world.
Okay, thank you very much. I can take questions at this point because this is not like actually one of these XMOOC videos. I'm going to present the video and then do questions and discussion live afterwards. So if anybody has anything that they'd like to say. Oh, somebody over there. I think it's you. You can. I don't understand that he's seen it. I actually was tempted to actually send him a message and ask him if I could interview him, but I didn't.
More seriously on that, so you talk about the idea of where open education lies within this kind of, brilliantly done argument for we're at a crossroads where we take a choice. Could you elaborate on what that would mean for open education in general? What would that mean in terms of how do we think about systematizing, quote unquote, to use a Michael Barber term, what we're doing here?
Systemization also always presents a lot of difficulties. I mean, I think actually what we've seen so far with open education is the fact that actually by explicitly not kind of making the attempt to actually measure everything and track everything and try and do personalization that way, it's actually a more personalized experience. You can actually just find stuff and start actually working with it and find other people that are actually working on the same thing and learn with them. And that's an incredible strength actually in education, because I mean that is a big part of the way that we all learn. I mean, George Siemens would tell us that we learn in groups, we learn in networks. And that actually is actually one of the most powerful things about open education, because people are learning for the sake of learning. They're learning in networks. As soon as we start to measure that, as soon as we start to look at actually individual performance and start offering marks based on individual performance, we kind of actually take away the incentive for those connections to happen. So it actually becomes a less attractive model. It becomes like the actual rest of education, the stuff that actually as a movement we're standing up and critiquing and saying actually it probably could be a bit better than this if we tried. Here. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to follow you out into the pool room, because I'm sort of trembling at the sort of hopeless message that I just saw there. My kids go to Boston Public Schools, and we just elected a new mayor. We had two choices between candidates, and both of them are advocating lifting the charter school cap, which I find really, really dangerous. OER has an incredible potential to help public education in ways that I don't think I've heard anyone talk about yet. But part of the obstacle, as I see it, is getting municipalities and school departments at incorporating OER into their curriculum and more into the Common Core. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would not like to stand actually here in Utah and talk about the Common Core, because I mean there's lots of people that could actually make this argument as to actually why it's probably not such a good idea, much better than I could. But I love a lot of the things. We don't get as much of this in the UK, but actually one of the big features of open education in the US is open textbooks. And this is something you see particularly in David Wiley's work in Utah. You start to see people actually developing textbooks, open textbook in the school system, saying, actually, we can use this, we can modify this. Actually, we can start playing with this. I think that that's got a huge potential in the public school system, but it does play in the opposite way to the charter school narrative, which it seems to me, coming from the UK, is primarily about actually measuring stuff. I think as educators, we need to get away from the idea that we have to measure everything, and if we don't measure it, it's not actually valuable. We need to stop actually making open resources, open courses, and then saying, actually, how many people are using these? Because 100,000 people are supposedly using Coursera, but that does not necessarily make it a more effective resource or a better resource than a resource that's been used just once, actually by one person. If you find exactly the right resource at exactly the right time, it can change everything. And if you start looking at the metrics and the numbers, I think actually you're in some kind of danger of actually losing that. And that kind of really scares me, that it's actually going to get like the actual mainstream music industry, that you get lots of stuff coming out and actually massively passed and massively pushed. It all sounds exactly the same, and that's what there is. So I think actually measurement and metrics, they look like they potentially drive up choice, but they actually drive down choice, because everything actually moves into the mainstream, and I'm not especially interested in the mainstream. I didn't really answer your question, did it? I'm sorry. Okay.
Thanks. Rob Farrow, Open University. David, your film was brilliant. Well done.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask you about, I suppose, about the culture in British universities. It seems to me that most academics that you talk to don't really want to be part of these kind of reforms, and there has the feeling of it being imposed from above. Mm-hmm. And there's this kind of burgeoning management class, MBA-style operation going on. What do you think people within these institutions can do to try and avoid the way things are going? Or is there something inevitable about it, somewhat ironically, given the earlier presentation?
I think I can answer that in as to what academics and people in education systems can do to help at this point. I could answer in 3 words, I think. Start a blog. Start actually talking about this stuff. Start talking about the actual the stuff that's actually happening every day in a classroom, in lecture theatres, online. I mean, you actually mentioned the the class of managers, and I'm not actually going to slag off managers and policymakers because I am one. So I can't really do that. But if you don't actually, as a manager, as a policymaker, make an effort to understand education, to understand what is actually happening, the temptation is to just actually look at the metrics. And I think as academics, as people who understand metrics and the actual limits of metrics, we need to be a lot clearer, actually, rather than saying, okay, actually we can let you have these numbers, and then secretly turning to one side and saying, actually, it's all completely meaningless. Actually, these numbers are nonsense. We probably need to be slightly more upfront in saying that, look, this is not telling you what you think it's telling you. This is not telling you what you actually need to be hearing. I got a lot of criticism in the UK. I, as people might or might not know, I actually looked after the big government-funded open education program in the UK, and I was straight down the line. I'm not actually letting people have any metrics. I'm not going to tell you how many resources are made. I'm not even going to look. I'm not going to tell you how many people downloaded the resources. I'm not even going to look. And that is the most difficult thing I have ever done, to keep that argument sustained, to not actually bow to the pressure, saying, yeah, I can measure this, I can tell you how many actual resources are in this repository, and I can guess what else is out there. I'm not actually going to look at metrics. I don't think we can do that. I think we actually need to start actually weaning our managers and our policymakers off these big numbers. And the actual big number stuff, I mean, this is Michael Barber. This is what he has brought to public policy around education. And this is actually the reason that I spent 6 months of my life actually making a film that's actually criticized them. It's not because I've got anything against him as a person. He's probably a really nice guy. I'd like to meet him. But I don't like actually where he's going with measuring stuff. I don't like actually where he's going with actually standardizing stuff in the name of choice. That just doesn't work for me.
Last question. That was the last question.
I think I've silenced everybody. Thank you. If I could just say a couple of things in closing. First of all, the actual reference at the end of the film, tiny.cc/opened13, that's got a complete set of references for the actual film and a little bit of a critical commentary around it. It's got some other material as well. There's actually 4 separate blog posts in there. It's got a link to the film on YouTube. If people want to share that or watch it again or kind of anything else you'd like to do with it, I think especially you should remix it. I'd like to see people remix it. That'd be fantastic. And the second thing I wanted to say, if you would like to come to the United Kingdom and talk about open education resources and open education, there's a fantastic conference next April, which is called Open Education Resources 14. It'll be held in Newcastle in the UK, which is a nice part of the world. And there's a call for Papers Open now. I've got some flyers in my bag that I'll put on the table at the front, if you can please take one. And think about actually putting a paper in, because it's just lots of fun in the UK. I can recommend it. Thank you.